Trey Stevens, thank you for coming and spending time with me here at the Upfront Summit. We're here today to talk about defense tech and the state of the union. We're going to get to Anduril for sure, but before we get there, just give us the lay of the land. Why are we here? Why is defense tech important? Where have we come from?
Yeah, I mean, for a really long time, post-Cold War, we being the United States, as well as our allies and partners, had demonstrated that we had total technological superiority on the battlefield. And this might not seem like it matters, but it matters a lot for maintaining peace through deterrence by showing your adversary that if they were to try to engage in combat, there would be a price to pay that's so high that it wouldn't be worth doing. And this is kind of why we had these, fringe conflicts. You see things from insurgent groups and terrorist organizations, but great power conflict didn't really happen for a long time. As technology has shifted and the United States' position in the world has changed for a variety of different reasons, we're in this kind of period where we have to figure out ways to combat potential threats from great powers, our peers, our global peers, in a way that leads to continued deterrence into the future. It's really all about sustaining peace rather than encouraging greater war. We had this long period of what we would call exquisite systems. You build like a $10+ billion aircraft carrier, you build a $100+ billion airplane, and they have really long sensors, and they have the ability to project force. But that's not how the adversaries are entering conflict now. They're entering with swarms of attritable assets, low-cost assets. This is what we're seeing in Russia in Ukraine with the conflict with Russia. It's what we saw in Armenia and Azerbaijan. And we're changing our force posture to be more able to deal with these sorts of conflicts. The problem is that all of these conflicts that exist are all the technologies that are enabling for this are really software problems. It's how do you command and control a large number of assets in a battle space? How do you give it autonomy so it's not super manpower intensive? How do you manage the ubiquity of new types of sensors and reasoning? And so the existing defense companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, they're not software companies. They've built multi-billion-dollar platforms, but they don't have the ability to step into that in the same way that the tech community does. And so Anduril, when we started the company in 2017, was really about solving and addressing that core problem. How do we bring these next generation software capabilities to the battlefield in a way that will lower the cost of engagement and also help create a deterrent edge for the country and our allies moving forward?
Yeah, say more about the cost piece, because I've heard you talk about it before, right? It's not just about these exquisite systems. The cost of the adversary systems are so cheap that it becomes this kind of economic battle. Say more about that.
Yeah, I'll just use a very clear anecdotal example. Many of you are probably familiar with what's happening in airspace dominance, where you have everything from a Group 1 drone, like a DJI that's been modified to carry some sort of payload, or something as simple as a hand grenade and a grabby arm, all the way through the several $100,000 Iranian Shahed drones, which are essentially kamikaze drones. The way that you engage with those historically has been to shoot a Patriot missile at it to take it down, which is pretty effective. The Patriot missile was originally developed in 1968. It's an old platform, has a very expensive seeker. It turns out that every shot is $2.25 million for the US taxpayer. When our allies and partners are engaging, it's more like $4 million because they're paying a higher premium for those capabilities. So the economic arbitrage doesn't really work. And so if you want to shoot down a $150,000 Iranian drone, we need to be able to counter that with a similarly priced or lower priced counter-air system. And so it's all about layers. And this is what Anduril is working on, is filling that gap and addressing some of these core problems in ways that allow us to counter the threat of the future.
We've talked a little bit about the February 22 report from the Undersecretary of Defense about the consolidation of the defense industrial base and the sort of lack of competition. There's a stat in there that says 10% of contract actions are sole sourced, but 48% of dollars are sole sourced. So you can see this sort of disparity, right? Like clearly if there's no competition, you're going to charge more for it.
Yep.
How do we get out of that system?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a crazy irony that the most communist part of the United States, the United States economy, is the defense industry. It's like of all industries, it's there's a kind of an oligarchy that has held the ground for a long time. If you go back to right after the end of the Cold War, the Secretary of Defense called together all of the heads of the defense companies in what colloquially became known as the Last Supper. And in the Last Supper, he said, the Cold War is over. Defense spending as a percentage of GDP is going to go down. You must consolidate or die. And the tacit agreement with the defense industry was that if they did their part, the DoD would do theirs, which is that they were going to flow money into each of these big defense contractors at roughly inflation level growth on an annual basis. So they became some of the safest stocks that you could possibly own. And they wanted to maintain nearly perfect competition between the big five. This has persisted until today. It's not good for the US taxpayer. You're not really getting any innovation. The companies aren't owning the cost of research and development for new platforms. They're just taking government money to fund the project and then taking a small margin on top of that. And I think the opportunity that we've been pushing at Anduril is to say, look, we believe that you can do this with fixed price contracts. Like, I can sell you a thing that exists, and I will own the cost and the risk for developing the thing, as long as you're going to be a buyer on the other side once it's developed and ready for production. And based on the historical success in the last 20 years of companies like Palantir and SpaceX, really just Palantir and SpaceX, we kind of have a precedent that we were able to operate under that allowed us to grow into that model much more quickly than we otherwise would have been able to.
Specifically, like when you go to bid on stuff like this, right? The sort of traditional models, there's the sort of RFP process, and then you're going through all the requirements and the specs. How do you guys sort of engage with the DoD so that you're not in that and you can kind of do the conversation on your terms?
Well, the key thing is to build a capability first. And then you have the leverage to go to the customer and say, we built a thing based on feedback that we got from you about what the problem is. And this is the technical decisions that we made to build this product. And we believe that this creates the value that you're looking for. And we don't need you to define all the requirements to us. This is a commercially available item that you can buy today. And I think there are enough really talented visionary people in these decision-making positions that that's a really attractive value proposition for them, so they don't have to go through, a 10-year development program that oftentimes has gone the wrong way.
You guys are prime on multiple DoD production contracts. We've talked a little bit about how you guys sort of do the R&D yourselves. You're not sort of doing it alongside the government. And that gives you the speed. I think you guys call it outpacing the threat. What other differences would you say there are between the way Anduril does business and the way sort of the existing primes do it?
I actually think there's probably less than you might think, other than trying to stay away from cost plus contracts, which are these kind of requirements driven programs. It is very, very hard to do work with the United States government. The road to success is littered with the dead bodies of startups that have been trying to do this for a long time. It's never been easier than at any point in American history to win a pilot or a prototype. Like, any of us in the room could start a company and get an SBIR contract in the next 3 months. It's like there's just free money falling out of the sky. It's crazy. But actually converting that into production is very nearly impossible. And so you have to know what you're doing. You have to understand how to do government relations. You have to have talented lobbyists that are, standing behind you as you build these businesses. And I think a lot of that is mirrored pretty closely by how the primes do their business as well. And so have a better product, have a real strategy, and know how to engage with the system. And I think this is where a lot of startups kind of miss some steps.
I'd be remiss not to ask you, just because of the conflict that's happening right now, and you kind of mentioned the Russia-Ukraine thing, how much Anduril gear is out there right now?
We are deployed all over the world in conflict zones, in areas that very potentially could become conflict zones. And I think the important thing for any company is to learn from the conflicts that are happening so that you can build capabilities not for that conflict necessarily, but for future conflicts that you're going to see some of the same things play out. If you look at what the United States has provided Ukraine as part of our aid package to them, most of the tech, the vast majority of the tech that we're sending their way are legacy systems that were originally developed in the Cold War from 1960 to 1990. things like Stingers, Javelins, HIMARS, Gimlers, Patriots. And these are capabilities that were literally sitting in like storehouses, ready to be deployed for a conflict. And we burned through our inventory really fast in support of this conflict and others. And you're not really in a position when something breaks out to say, there's this like next generation thing that we can do and it's cutting edge and our own soldiers haven't even been trained on it, but we can ship this down range to our ally or our partner. It doesn't really work like that. And so our role as a company at Anduril is get ahead. As you said, outpacing the threat. We want to be in a position where the thing that happens 2 years from now, we're already going to be in inventory and ready to rock and roll by the time that conflict comes up. Too many people trying to focus on like, how do I serve the need that happened today? It's like, you're too late. You missed the wagon.
There's a great segue to my next question on timing. You've said before that if a investing area has a name, you're sort of already too late.
Yeah.
Are we in a defense tech bubble right now?
It's a great question. Yeah, if you look at the returns from a venture capital perspective in any industry or category, it tends to be driven by what is known as a power law curve, where the top 1 or 2 investments represent the vast majority of all of the gains that you'll see in that category. And we can kind of walk through this. It's like if you are interested in doing investments in space, SpaceX is so much better of an investment than every other company that you would cumulatively be worse investing in the whole category than if you had just invested in SpaceX. The same thing could be said of social media. If you think about like all the thousands of companies that emerged in the wake of Facebook, you'd be like, well, certainly there's some big winners in there. And a company like Snapchat, which I haven't looked at the market today, but last time I checked, it was trading at like an $18 billion market cap. Facebook's worth $1.2 trillion. It's like, that's super power law. You think about cybersecurity companies. Between CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, and Microsoft, that's the majority of the market. Like, yeah, there's a lot of companies that are operating in, the range of hundreds of millions of dollars or maybe low single-digit billions of dollars of exits, but the power law goes to those big companies. In crypto, there's very few points in the history of crypto where it wouldn't have been a better decision to just buy Bitcoin. Like, you should just buy Bitcoin. And then maybe Coinbase, there are a couple moments where it would have been better to invest $1 in Coinbase than to buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. But I think when you think about a sector like defense tech right now, when it's in this moment of hype and high energy, I hope that these companies work. But there's a question, is it just better to have shares in Anduril? And I'm starting to believe that the N of 1 generational opportunity is really where we should be leaning in.
I'll try to take the other side.
Yeah.
In that same report that we just talked about, the DoD kind of mentioned some things that they want to do to promote innovation. Work with small businesses. They set up some new offices that could help get all these SIBRs out there. They're using OTs to drive some more R&D. Is this not just that system working and we're just sort of at the beginning of it and now there's going to be sort of a revolution in American manufacturing and defense and all of that?
Look, there are a lot of great defense tech companies that are probably going to do really well. And I think we should be looking at these companies and supporting them. There are also a lot of organizations inside the Defense Department, both domestically and internationally, that are leaning into this moment as well. I think what the Defense Innovation Unit does is great. AFWorks, SoftWorks, great. Army Futures Command, great. These are all positive movements in the right direction. If you look at the revenue for venture-backed companies that are selling into the Defense Department, it's SpaceX at the top, it's Palantir beneath that, and then it's Anduril under that, and then again, you have a power law curve down the backside of it. And so I think you have to kind of ask this question around what the terminal value is. Mm-hmm. And I'm optimistic. I think directionally we're heading down a good path. But Lockheed Martin does $67.5 billion a year in revenue, which is like literally every venture-backed defense company combined is probably, I don't know, 1/6 of that amount. So we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit to you. You were one of the co-founders of Anduril. There was a time when that business was being founded that you could have chosen to be full-time operator at Anduril, but you chose to sort of stay at Founders Fund. Say more about that decision and how that sort of impacts your day-to-day.
Because defense is such a hard sector to operate in, our view, the view of myself and my co-founders, was that we had to have a really deep bench of executive talent. And so we didn't feel like it could just be like me and Palmer. That probably wasn't enough. Palmer's good at a lot of things. I'm good at less things than Palmer, but some things. But there would be a lot of ground to cover where neither of us had any particular skill. And so our approach was go out and get a bunch of really capable co-founders as well as a founding engineering team around us. And that strategy has paid off. And so I think when I took a step back and said, where do I fit into the way that we do business? It wasn't operating as the CEO. Brian is a better CEO than I would ever be. It wasn't as being CTO or like the kind of founder research and development. Palmer is going to be 100 orders of magnitude better than me at that. It wasn't going to be the COO. Matt Grimm is a better operator than I'll ever be. It wasn't going to be a head of GR. Megan Milam and Chris Brose are going to be way better at that than I'll ever be. And so the question was, where does my skill set align in the gaps of what we need to do? And that wasn't a thing that I felt like I needed to step out of Founders Fund to do really well. In fact, I think my role at Founders Fund makes me even better as an operator at Anduril. But I don't think that would be the case for everyone. I think it's very idiosyncratic.
Yeah, and I think part of your role at Anduril sort of really nicely overlaps with the Founders Fund stuff too, right?
It does, yeah. I handle a lot of the investor relations, corporate development, and that, like, having kind of a vision across the entire industry makes it much easier for me to execute in that operational capacity for sure.
Your partner Brian Singerman said that you guys were paintballing when you guys came up with the idea. Is that true?
Man, I have a long history with Palmer. We were the first institutional investor in Oculus, and I think I was actually playing laser tag with Palmer at the time, and he may or may not have been riding a mountain bike and almost cut off his toe and had to be removed from the location by a helicopter. But that's a story for another time.
Well, I guess this is actually kind of related in a maybe dark way, but we saw some powerful weapons in that video. Mm-hmm. A lot of things that could end someone's life. How do you think about the ethics of what you're building, and like what's your relationship to that?
Super important question. It's something that I take very seriously, and at Anduril we think about quite a lot. I've written at great length about this. If any of you want to go and look into the ethics of defense, there's a lot of scholarship going back for literally thousands of years. About how to engage in conflict. Most particularly, St. Augustine talked at length about what he called just war theory. And I think, there's a world in which we could say, we refuse to engage. Like, we're pacifists, we're going to let things happen the way they're going to happen. The problem is that you're encouraging a tremendous amount of injustice in that decision. Innocent people are going to die. And maybe you could, wash your hands of it and say, Pontius Pilate, this isn't my problem. Someone else is responsible for these people dying. But the blood is on your hands, I think. And so the principles of just war theory say that there are ways that you can engage that are certainly more ethical than others. And that includes things like deterrence. Like, do you have the force to prevent conflict from happening? Another is proportionality. If someone attacks you, are you attacking them with a disproportionate amount of force? Discrimination. If you're engaging in conflict, are you doing that in a way that avoids civilian casualties to the point possible? And I could kind of walk through there's a bunch of these just war principles. And if you look at the arc of violent conflict over the last 100 years or more, you see that we kind of started from engaging a long, long time ago with punching each other, and then it was like you go up to rocks, and then you go to swords when we figure out metal, and then you have bow and arrow, and then you have catapults and trebuchets, and then the development of gunpowder. Things just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you get to the 1940s, and all of a sudden you have atomic weapons. And we're all looking at each other, in this, you guys have seen the Spider-Man meme probably. Everyone's just pointing at each other, and they're like, guys, we could literally destroy the entire world. This is a pretty bad deal. And then we step back into this posture of what is called strategic deterrence, where you say, we don't want to destroy the world. We all agree that eliminating humanity is a bad trade. And we started coming back down the curve. And so we got to like maximum destructive potential, and then we started developing precision-guided munitions. If you're going to take out a target, can you shoot a missile through a window and take out only that target and eliminate the risk from dropping a bomb and potentially taking out a school that's next to a building? And I think what we're doing at Anduril, by focusing on the software side of this, focusing on sensing, focusing on perception, focusing on autonomy, is we're saying we want to not only remove the human, the men and women who are putting themselves at risk from doing dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs. We're doing that, but we're also doing it in a way that we believe enhances just war theory. We want to be more accurate. We want to be more precise. We want to discriminate better. We want to execute the right amount of force proportionally to combat our adversaries. And we want to do that in a way that's so overwhelming in our military advantage that it would be unthinkable for Russia to invade Ukraine. And I think that path is not only ethical, but it's just and it's good. And I would be happy to debate someone on that if they disagree.
You've never been shy to sort of, or you've never been shy about your religious beliefs and the way that impacts you. Tell me about how that that sort of informs your day to day.
Yeah, as you say, I'm a very outspoken Christian, Protestant Christian. I've never shied away from wearing that on my sleeve. I think like there's a lot of dumb, pointless things that we could all do with our life, right? Like we could, George Clooney starts a tequila brand, and the Jenners start makeup companies, and they're just starting commodities at the end of the day. It's like the reason they're making money on these things is because they're selling their brand. And the product is kind of pointless. They could pick any product. It doesn't matter. They're just shilling a commodity on the back of their brand. I think in tech, we have a tendency to do this too, except it's enterprise SaaS instead of tequila. It's easy. There's like a kind of a model for doing it. It doesn't really change anything. It's like, yeah, you build another dev tool, good for you, but it doesn't move the needle for humanity. You're just kind of pushing an 18-month thing down the road to cash out and make some bank. I think my approach to this is like, look, if we're actually trying to improve the conditions for humanity, these are big quests. These are good quests, and we should be stepping into the act as builders and creators to take responsibility for actually doing something. It's not sufficient to stand up here at the Upfront Summit and say, I'm making the world a better place. I'm going to do my best to make the world not only a different place, but also really a better place. Like, I think that is my role. And I think a lot of that comes informed from my faith, which not because of my impact, but it has informed Western culture, which is this idea that this is not zero sum. We are not in a moment of scarcity. Abundance is possible. A better future is possible. We can be tech optimistic. We can lead to a better world, but we have to be involved in doing that. We have a responsibility.
Thank you for that. We're running out of time, so I just wanted to say I think the country is better off because you are running Anduril. I think the world is better off because you are running Anduril. A lot of the defense founders and investors here stand on your shoulders. So thank you for being here, and appreciate this.
Much appreciated.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Trey.